My name's Tess Fitzpatrick and I'm Professor of Applied Linguistics, Head of Department at Swansea University, and I'm currently the Chair of the British Association of Applied Linguistics. I think my educational experiences, both as a learner and later as a teacher, certainly fostered and nurtured an interest in applied linguistics, but I didn't know that the applied linguistics label really existed until later on in my career. So in school, for example, I was interested in languages. In those days we did O-levels, and 4 of my O-levels were language O-levels. And I think I was very aware of having an interest in how language worked. For example, when people had communication disorders, or that tip of the tongue phenomenon when you know the word but you can't quite get it out. So there was an interest in what I now know to be applied linguistics for a long time. And when I became a language teacher, I was an English language teacher for a while. I was lucky to work in a very well-resourced context. So I was working mostly in the UK in the late 1980s and early 1990s. There were lots of resources, but I was very interested in what the reasoning was behind the resources. So why are we encouraged to teach in this particular way or this particular language? So that, and an interest in observing how individual students differed so much in their approach to language learning, all really was me becoming interested in applied linguistics. But as I say, it was a way down the line before I had that label to attach to those interests. My work as an applied linguist and as an academic researcher now, and my previous career as a language teacher, are hugely linked and aligned and inform each other. I still work closely with language teaching and testing practitioners, and I think that's a hugely influential partnership in terms of my own work, and hopefully, in terms of the field in general. It's very hard to narrow one's research down to a particular instance of a contribution to the field of applied linguistics, or even a particular strand. I suppose in terms of my own research interests, I'm interested in lexical processing. I'm interested in how vocabulary is acquired and also is forgotten in a second language, but also in a first language and in other contexts as well. And some of the work that I've done on psycholinguistic processes has come to... I work with word association data a lot. And the findings that have come out of that strand of my research really do challenge this notion or this assumption that as we develop in proficiency in our second language, we become more like so-called expert, so-called native speaker of that target language. So in my research, for a start, it questions the idea of native speaker norms, that all native speakers, that's the term that has been commonly used, use language and process language in a similar way to each other, but it also challenges the fact that as a second language learner, we should be moving towards that native speaker ideal in terms really of as I said, psycholinguistic processes, so the way that we organise our mental lexicon, for example. So that has not only led to kind of a questioning of the idea of the native speaker target, but it's also opened up a load of questions about individual learner differences, and taking those beyond kind of learner styles and taking them into the realms of psycholinguistic processes, how we retrieve words, how we store words, and so on. I think the relevance of our work as applied linguists sometimes isn't always in that we can produce certain tools or inform certain materials. I think a lot of that work with language teachers is to do with asking the right questions, asking the right research questions, and encouraging teachers to ask the right questions about their own methods and approaches as well. And I also I very strongly believe that it's a partnership. It's not about research informing teaching practice. It's about a mutually beneficial partnership. And certainly in my current role at Swansea University, I'm very lucky to work beside language teaching practitioners and teacher trainers of English, but also of Welsh language. And I learn an awful lot from them, from the things that they tell me about what happens in a classroom or the challenges they face and so on. And also their information about how their field is moving forward. It's a highly professionalised field, and I think as researchers we need to continue to pay attention to that. There's a project that I'm working on at the moment, which is in close partnership with teachers of Welsh actually, rather than teachers of English. Welsh language teaching is relatively under-resourced. I come to this background from an English language teaching background, relatively under-resourced, and I'm working with colleagues in applied linguistics, in computational linguistics, and in Welsh language specialists to build a corpus of Welsh language. And this is a funded project, it's RC UK funded, and the unique selling point, I suppose, of the corpus is that not only is it going to be an openly available resource, but it's crowdsourced. The corpus is crowdsourced, but it's user informed from the start. And one of the key elements of the corpus will be a pedagogic toolkit that will grow with the corpus. So we're growing that as a resource at the same time as we're building the corpus, which means that we're talking to language teachers, we're talking to language learners and figuring out what tools they need and what resources they need in place, so that as we build the corpus and as we tag it and as we formulate this pedagogic toolkit, we can specifically mould it to their needs. And we're using information from English language teaching too. We're using, there's a researcher in Montreal, Tom Cobb, who has produced an online resource, a lexical, complete lexical tutor toolkit, and we're using that as a model because we know that that's accessed by hundreds of teachers and learners every day. So that, I think that's a good example of working in partnership with teachers to produce the sort of resources that we hope will make a big difference in classrooms. I think language teachers, I would always encourage language teachers to find out about the British Association of Applied Linguistics or similar organisations in their own countries. BAAL is an international organisation and we have a very, very active mailing list. So join an organisation. I thought that BAAL was all about the conference when I was a language teacher, and that was a conference that I as a language teacher didn't belong at. And that's not true. Language teachers belong at this conference, but moreover, BAAL has got a huge range of resources, including a very active mailing list, that helps language teachers to see the bridge between what they're doing and the research work. In terms of reading, there are journals specifically targeted at language teaching and language teaching research. In terms of my own research, there's a paper that I published earlier this year on it's called Making Sense of Productive Vocabulary Tests. I've worked a lot with vocabulary tests, and I know that teachers are faced with this plethora of tests, and it's very hard to select which one to choose, given the time restraints and so on. So there's an article that we published in TESOL Quarterly that attempts to give teachers a framework and researchers a framework with which to make sense of these language tests. The psycholinguistic processing work that kind of challenges the idea of native speaker norms and of learners working towards them was kicked off by an article I wrote in 2006 called Habits and Rabbits, Word Associations and the L2 Lexicon, that was published in the Euroslar yearbook. But the book that really pushed me, I suppose, across the divide between language teaching and research is a book I was recommended to read by turned out to be my PhD supervisor, and that's Jean Aitchison's Words in the Mind, which is a very, very accessible book. And as a language teacher, reading that book opens a world of information about phenomena that you've already observed in the classroom, and it makes you think about it a little bit differently. That was a very influential read for me. Yeah.